sort of over here. See how it goes.
We'll have fun.
You will. Cool. Welcome everybody to our social media event that we've been talking about for a number of months now. We've had so many great pieces of feedback as we've been marketing this and getting everybody to the event. There's so many people that have signed up for this. Over 100 of you have pre-booked for this event, and we're so glad that you've checked in. To those who've checked in at the last minute, we're really glad to have you here, and it's really great to see you jump in. This is the Digital Agenda. This is a series of events where we look at digital as a whole, and we look at various different points of the digital agenda, the digital economy, and everything that makes sense about what it is that we're trying to do in this digital economy, because let's be honest, it's not always as simple as it seems. Today, we're really wanting to take a look at social media, but particularly the social data conversation, and in context with how social media data really matters in the business conversation, in the marketing conversation. And I'm here with two really great guests. Our partners at Sprout Social have introduced us to Susie, and she is a really fantastic person who is a solutions engineer at Sprout Social. She's joining us from Ireland, so that's where the really fantastic accent comes from. And she's dealing with this data conversation on an ongoing basis. Her game is to really build these solutions out for her clients. And so she's got a lot of experience in the space, and we're really glad to have her here. So welcome, Susie, to the conversation. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We've also got MJ here. MJ is a South African favorite for these types of panels. MJ is the head of group digital communications at Sasol, and his experience in this game is both from an agency perspective and from a corporate communications perspective over many years. And he has really been able to bring a lot to the game from a digital perspective on a whole. And when it comes to the social data conversation, we're really looking forward to unpacking some of the mechanics around his experience in actually rolling this out, both in agency and in corporate. Because in agency, we have the tendency to roll these things out for corporate, but in corporate, you've got to that's kind of where the rubber hits the road. And if it doesn't really make sense, it doesn't make financial viability, it gets turfed pretty quickly, and it's going to make sense. So it's really great to have someone who's sitting on both sides of the coin on this in this perspective. My role here today is really to facilitate the discussion. We placed the social data conversation on the table because it's been my experience that social data is really misunderstood. Social data is this almost enigma that sits out in the interface of social media as this thing that is out there that we have access to, that is so valuable, and that we should have in our mix and we should be using, but we don't really know how to use. And I've seen people spend a lot of money tracking social data just to get a little sentiment graph on their reports. And for me, that's great. It's good to have that sentiment graph, but does it really mean anything to your business? Does it really actually bring value at the end of the day to what it is that you're bringing to the table as a social media expert, as a team, as a marketing team? And does it have any executive appeal at the end of the day? And so these reports that we put together, this data that we're putting on the table, does it really matter in the context of what we're trying to do in the marketing space? It's been my own experience that we've been able to utilize social data to be able to map out entire kind of contexts for our clients. We've been able to help them utilize social data to be able to figure out how to enter into new markets, to break into new countries, to figure out how to adapt their communication strategies to make a difference, to really stand out and strategically apply themselves into a market, and to drive a strategic change that creates an opportunity for them to really own a marketplace from a conversation perspective. And these things are really important, and these things are really useful, but there are strategy conversations which sometimes go beyond the extent to where many agencies and many marketers are often able to play. And so social data sometimes becomes an executive conversation, or becomes a product conversation, or a business conversation. And so this social data conversation for me sometimes gets difficult to have as marketers, because the extension of where we're sitting, the extension of what we're doing, extends various different departments. And so there's this complexity that comes to play. And so for me, that's why I felt we needed to have this conversation. I felt that this conversation was important because at the end of the day, social data has value, but we've really got to kind of consider how it's going to play itself out in our organizations. And it's a platform conversation because we've somehow got to bring it to the table, but it's also a process conversation. It's a business conversation. And so that's why we've got people like MJ in this room today to really understand, how does this apply? What are the practicalities of what this really means? And how do we bring this to the table? And so, yeah, let's jump in. I'm going to ask Susie to see if she can try and bring this and make this a bit more real. What is social data? What does it actually mean? And like, how do we track it? What is it? What is it to Sprout Social? What is this thing called social data to those who see it, their eyes sort of bling up and they go, oh, this is really exciting. This is really sexy. This is really cool. I'm glad we're doing this. But what the hang is it really? What are we talking about today?
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing with social data is that it's nothing to be afraid of. I think that's one thing you're touching on very well there, Mike. It's exactly that. It's performance, it's conversation, it's reputation management. It's a means for your entire agency, your client base, your brand, your business to be able to really track and monitor anything and everything that's going on, not just in the business, but even maybe in the sector you're involved with or somewhere that you're keen to go. I think it's a powerful tool that helps your clients as well understand audiences. And then as an agency, you get to better serve them with your services. I think it really does feed in as well as something you've also touched on to many parts of the business or brand that maybe even you might not realize yet. And I think often it's the struggle with selling the value of social data to external, internal stakeholders as well. I think it's a very, very powerful means to evolve your business. I think it doesn't lie if you're doing things kind of slowly and correctly. And I definitely feel very, very passionate about the ability to sit down and look at the numbers, look at what's happening. You know, it's not just about the metrics themselves, but why and what is causing them. Where's your placement on social? Where's your engagement on social? And what are you doing to drive those numbers? I think it could be an excitable thing to be looking at as well, because it really does help, I think, push us as social media marketers. You're not in this industry or in this game because you want to sit still. And I think being able to get to grips with the data, being able to ascertain what's going on there and figuring out your different audiences is really, really important.
So the interesting thing to me there is that you touch on this thing around like the different stakeholders that need buy-in. So again, I'm just going to jump this back into your court, because for me, it's about understanding who those stakeholders are. So I kind of spoke about the fact that it bounces between product and executives and marketers and those. In your experience, who are these stakeholders that Sprout Social see as the people that are actually involved in this data conversation?
It can be anybody and everybody, and I think it's actually important to put in front as many people as possible. I think sometimes with social media management, social performance, content creation, community management, all those pieces of the puzzle there, they often get forgotten about from the top down. And I think being able to actually say it, and there's some really valuable nuggets that sometimes people find, and it's really important to work together and be able to put that in front of those executives and those other people. You might find some, unusual trends or nuances that go on in a smaller audience in social, and being able to say that to someone maybe on another team. Hey, did you know we were seeing this complaint? We were seeing this product feedback, or we were seeing people asking for this, or when we casually mentioned this on social, our engagement absolutely took off. That can feed into things like other people's budgets, other people's content, other people's assets or things that they can give you, and get people excited as well about social. And I think it can tie a lot of pieces together within a brand, and also from the agency perspective, putting that in front of a client when that's what they are, essentially asking for as a service. They can, of course, go on and maybe look at one or two metrics, but what's really, really important is being able to actually give that an underlying evaluation, I think, for sure. And I think it's an education piece that then happens as well when you start spreading that information far and wide within your brand, within your business, and to your clients and the various, different parts of the puzzle there. it can really start to help get people excited and bought in on social more, which is sometimes, I think, it can be a hesitance, and then all of a sudden they suddenly realize that it's actually an absolute gem to be able to crack that, a little bit.
You're touching on something that I've actually haven't really thought about until literally the second with the conversation that we're having. So we talk a lot about silos in organizations, and I'm making an assumption that this is something that happens in MJ's corner quite a lot. Is that the corporate world is often very siloed, and we talk about it almost in vertical silos. You've got product people that are kind of siloed from marketing, who are siloed from business, et cetera, et cetera. But what you spoke about now almost feels like a horizontal silo, where we're almost siloing community managers from the marketing, from the people that they report to the people that they report to. And so there are decisions that are being made at maybe at social data levels, where reporting functions at, say, certain types of social data reporting levels are being reported back to, that those decisions are being made. But if that data is not made available at community management levels, then certain nuggets and sort of frontline information aren't really being fed back into either. Yeah,
exactly that. I think it's so critical, social data. It really is. It's about like being able to communicate whatever everybody's finding and working as a team. I think you'll be really surprised to find that, like, exactly what you mentioned, there's someone who could be working from the community management piece, handling awful lot of incoming queries, incoming messaging, complaints, anything like that. And then they're suddenly seeing a trend, they're seeing something particular. How did they need to be able to get the data from that and be able to say that to another team. And it could be something as well as like the paid team and the organic team. They often sit across the room from each other sometimes. And you'll be able to actually walk across that room and say to them, hey, listen, we're actually noticing that a lot of people are inquiring about this or getting excited about this. Is there something we could be creating, could be working on? And then that's when, that's when things just become really exciting as well. And I think you get to relay the data. I think everybody has their own level of importance with social data, but again, it all feeds into one really important holistic sense to some degree.
No, it's really interesting around the breakdown of the silo space and in using that data and making it accessible across those different teams. MJ, you've been driving this social strategy conversation for over 7 years at Sassel. How have you found the social data conversation? Have you been using it in the space, breaking down these silos, or is it something that has been effective? Have there been struggles in breaking these things down? Has it been something that's been useful and manageable within the communication strategy? Your portfolio is massive. I was taking a brief look at it online. It's a monster portfolio that you're looking after across multiple different regions, and it's quite something that you're needing to take on. So even just the idea of breaking down those silos across the board, that is a logistical challenge in itself. Does social data present an opportunity there? Does it help in that environment, like logistically?
Geez, there's so much to talk about. Yeah, this is really exciting. And again, Mike, always a pleasure to share a platform with you. I love what you've been doing with Digital Lab. Really big fan of how you've been advancing digital and really education around digital to demystify in South Africa and globally. So great job there. Susie, it's the first time that we're sharing a platform together. Honored, I love Sprout Social. I think that it's a powerful tool as well. So yeah, so many things to talk about. And I think let's just take a step back, right? So I'll zone in a little bit on silos. We'll talk a little bit about that because that's the real world, right? The real world is sometimes bureaucratic. The real world is sometimes made up of agenda, ego, politics, competing interests, whatever it is. And I think often as communication specialists, we try so hard to measure because we want to prove the value of the function. We want to prove the value of communication. We want to tell people, hey, look, communication works. But rather what we should be doing is we should be understanding business. We should be understanding what the business requires and measuring to make sure that our communication adds business value. And I don't think we do that too often. And I think sometimes we are our own worst enemies because we spend so much time trying to validate the importance of communication that we ourselves alienate ourselves from business. We ourselves distance ourselves from business. So one thing that I'm very intentional about, and this is within my team as well, and everyone in my team also believes in this, is that as much as we would engage with various communication specialist colleagues across the world or within different functions, we also engage with business. We also spend a lot of time understanding the business side of it. So my entire team would read the integrated report every single year. My entire team would engage and immerse themselves in the business side of it to understand at a production level what's happening, at a plant level, at a customer level, So as much as it might not necessarily always be within our portfolio in terms of our control, we can definitely influence across the board. So we believe, silos are a thing. And if social is left to the last moment as execution, you see how there's a disconnect. But it's really important from our side to make sure that when we have those conversations, we're not just representing communication, we understand business. And then all of a sudden, the conversation changes because business then recognizes, oh, you appreciate what we do, you understand what we do, you recognize our pain points. And then it's a wonderful conversation. Then it's not, okay, give me a social media post. It's like, here's a challenge we have. How is social media plugging into that? So that's the first part of it around silos. And again, it's
the thing is, so I love, and I actually look for clients, marketing clients who understand the business conversation that they're in. So like, because you'll meet marketing people who are like just sold, they're all about the marketing, but they don't really understand the business that they're in. And those guys scare me because it's the guys who understand that the business that they're in, that they understand that they're a part of a business and how that business operates. Those people, as marketing clients from an agency owner perspective, we can do so much more with people like that, because when we can have a conversation that revolves more around business than it does around marketing, you can do more with marketing when you understand and you work with someone and you partner with someone who understands the business conversation. Because if you're turning your marketing tools into a conversation around partnering towards business growth, as opposed to here's an expense for a campaign that could be a cool idea, those are two very different conversations, and they mean one is partnership and one is cool campaign, and they're worlds apart, And so interesting to hear you talk about that and to hear how you sort of building your teams with that business mindset, kind of with marketing as the default, but that business mindset being the core function. I think it's so key.
Definitely. And then it means that people will take you seriously because you're not just coming in with blue sky ideas that are completely disconnected with the reality of the business. And then it becomes a much easier conversation. But coming back to the social data question, specifically, and to zone in on that, that's really important for us as well. And why it's important is because we don't have a content conversation. We have a context conversation. It's very easy to create content and just put it out there with your old sort of, spray and pray method, where you just generate a ton of content and then you hope it'll answer questions. You hope it'll do a job of servicing whatever need you have. But if you don't understand the context, if you don't understand what people think about your brand, what the perception is of the brand, then you're not really being helpful. Content has very little value if it doesn't answer the context of the situation. I remember back in my agency days, I once did an audit on quite a large bank. And what we noticed was about 90% of that bank's website properties, all the URLs, were read by less than 10 people. So they had a lot of content, but it had no relevance. It had no context. It had no value. So all that effort went into the content, but no one actually said, what are people searching for? How do we make it more accessible? How do we make it easier? So I think within that, social data is really valuable for us when we run campaigns and we get feedback in terms of different types of questions that we can then package into infographics, into content, and try and answer and help people. So in terms of our effort, we might spend 30% creating initial content, but 70% of our effort is reacting to what we get so that our responses are valuable, our responses are meaningful. But it's also understanding, I think, what's important as well when we look at social data is a lot of people are going to talk about your brand and only some people are going to talk to your brand. So how do you differentiate between the two? How do you distinguish between those who want to have a conversation with the brand, an earnest conversation? Maybe it's customer support, maybe it's inquiry, sponsorships, whatever it is, versus other people who are just going to be talking about the brand and how much value do you put into that?
Yeah. Susie, it's interesting that that essentially, when I try and explain the difference, it's kind of like if we look at platforms that help you manage social media, that's essentially talking to people who are talking to your brand. And then social data platforms are essentially listening to the people that are talking about your brand. Is that sort of like a fair distinction, or is it more blurred than that?
I definitely say it's more blurred than that for sure. And I think you can find platforms that will help with both. Like, for example, with social listening, having that and then, alongside whatever it is you're doing. And that's, I really loved, MJ, the context over content line. I was writing that down furiously. I think that's a very true statement to make. Social listening can really help and harmonize with what's going on with your own data as well, because it's exactly that. It's going to capture those conversations about your brand and see how it does pair up. And I think it's important to almost as well invest in like a software or platforms to be able to do some of the legwork for you, so that you're not having to do it yourself. Your team, social practitioners I've yet to meet one who isn't stretched thin and who isn't juggling a lot of plates. So being able to leverage different tools and services that are going to help you with some of the groundwork, you're not having to do hundreds of alerts set up. You're not doing searches. Someone before with me made a mistake where, when I was in an agency, an account director told one of our clients that, oh yeah, no problem, Susie can do social listening for you. And it was basically me by myself for a brand that was also the name of a computer game, was the name of an anime comic, that was a food brand, and it was something else as well. So I was kind of sitting there being like, this would take me probably half my day every day if you think that I can build a report manually on something like that. Whereas when social listening is set up, that's amazing, because I only have to spend maybe, half an hour, 40 minutes, maybe actually kind of digging into that data and comparing it to what is going on in our own channels. And it's exactly that. It's making sure we're not pumping out content. It's not always the same. It's seeing what is the reactionary element. It's seeing what are people mentioning about our brand, so that we can actually be like, still relevant. You don't want to suddenly find out that people are eye rolling when you do something yet again. Rolling out the same hashtag holidays or getting on the same bandwagons for all the key events in the world. We all know that brands that like get absolutely, really do get a tough time when they do that kind of thing, and it's just completely out of context. And it's being able to have that sensibility around that as well. And that's why I really do feel very passionate about like the analytics and the social listening, really helping you to see social differently. I think that's where it comes down to. And giving you back your time so that you can actually do the evaluation on the data and actually have actionable insights that you can then roll out, not just maybe on the owned data per se, but again, MJ, as you mentioned, being able to go back to that bank and say to them, hey, that like only there's very few people actually clicking on all of this. Let's pivot. Let's figure out a different way to leverage different pieces of information, different strategies, and we'll continuously monitor all of any and all data to keep that up to date and relevant.
Guys, let me just pose something here, and it's just something that's popping into mind now, is the volume game. So the difference between working with a smaller sort of, let's not say startup, because then there's a brand we're building as an example, but let's say a smaller brand that's been going, it's a going concern that people know about, but it's not a big brand. We're not talking about a large volume of mentions, both talking about and talking to the brand, versus, let's use Sassel as an example, MJ, where we're making the assumptions, we're making lots of assumptions here, but I would hesitate to say things like, there's a lot of customer service taking place in your inboxes. There's a lot of questions around campaigns that you're running. There's a lot of backwards and forwards around the conversations and comments around campaigns, competitions, games, consumer engagement. And then there's B2B conversations, I'm assuming, that are also taking place around different things and stuff like that. So there's a number of sets of engagements. And the volume alone then creates a whole new set of complications for social data and social listening. And that so what became interesting to me is that as an agency, as we started to work with higher volume clients, we almost needed tools to manage the social listening conversation within the boundaries of what we ordinarily wouldn't need. So as an example, inboxing tools. Like now we needed tools to kind of navigate and analyze how the inbox was working and what people were saying with the inbox, so that we could actually understand what was going on there, as opposed to just kind of tapping away and being able to go, oh, okay, cool. Because we have one person who's answering sort of 2 or 3 questions a day, we can actually get a litmus test on this. When you've got 2 to 3 people managing an inbox, you can't rely on just that conversation being fed back to you by an individual. You now need these listening tools again to be able to kind of give you this volume conversation. And so again, this volume thing becomes a thing. Does the volume thing shift in your mind as you experience kind of the application of social data tools with different size opportunities? And what have kind of been kind of some of the key ways that you've seen that happen? Are there other examples other than the inboxing one that I've given?
The inboxing one is a great one, right? Because when someone inboxes you, there's a lot of psychology behind sending an inbox message.
Yeah.
Number one, it's a level of it's someone being private, right? It's someone being discreet. You're not putting it up on a public platform. Number two, it's someone being earnest as well. Because if they're taking the time to inbox you, there's a relevance attached to their query. There's a need or desire or something they need from the brand to get fulfilled. So that's really important to us. And, some platforms are better than other platforms in terms of assisting us with responding to queries. But at the same time, if we get 50 people sending us a Facebook message about a certain topic, that also tells us, hey, hang on, maybe there's 100 more people that haven't messaged us yet, but have the same question. Then it informs our content strategy in terms of, can we put that out? The other thing we need to consider as well is time. We sift through, my team and I, we sift through thousands upon thousands of mentions every single month, So you have to also develop a weighting system, a ranking system, set up alerts. So, what is that topic that has a certain amount of virality or engagement that becomes very high priority? What is something else that, you can respond to in an hour's time and it won't be that, it would be detrimental. So all of that gets taken into consideration. I think some platforms do it better than other platforms. But we're definitely seeing a shift happen in terms of volume. We're seeing a lot more people want to engage, via text, via social media. And again, it mirrors society. When's the last time, you picked up the phone and called someone versus going through to a website or WhatsApp chat or a chat bot or whatever it is. So we are seeing that shift happen, and it's happening on consumers' terms, so we're trying to meet them there. But at the same time, we're also trying to ensure that as much as it becomes bulk, it's also personalized to a certain extent. But there's always that cost, there's always the cost of time, the cost of resource. And we have to be very mindful of that. If you want to personalize at scale, you need resource. If you want to personalize at scale, you need time. And if you're not willing to dedicate that time, dedicate that resource, then, are you doing the right thing? Because that's where your consumers are. That's what they need from you.
Yeah.
So don't dismiss it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think on that one as well, what's interesting is that's also, again, where like data can become really valuable. When you said you don't have the resources or don't have the time, and then you start to get to pick up on, okay, exactly that. There's 10 queries that have come in that are maybe very nuanced, versus something that could be a quick turnaround time. And I think measuring any of that as well, that inbound as well as outbound, because we can talk about like, yes, content performance, absolutely. But what about the level of incoming messages? Which platform are they coming from? How often are your team having to spend maybe going away, speaking to others, escalation? Again, with maybe in your business, MJ, that might have to go up through a ladder if it's pretty serious, for example, and other folks might have to get involved. All of that time investment, and then by being able to, again, take the data and actually say to like someone else, this is actually how long my team has to spend doing this, aka I need more headcount and I need more team members. And again, that can even be such a valuable piece of data measurement as well when it comes to social, when it comes to the inbox.
Yeah. So the conversations is like pivoting so much so in the sense that like the social data conversation has value on scale, which I think it's easy to kind of pivot to quite quickly. It's quite easy to say that as a big brand, as a big organization, that it has scale. But before we jump off the scale mentality, let me just pose a question here, which I think it's a valuable one to ask. There's also another assumption that the social data conversation only really has value for the B2C, the business to consumer brands. But what about the business to business brands? Is there value for a B2B brand, a brand that sells direct to another business? Is there value for those kinds of businesses in this environment, in these cases? What are the kind of the use cases in your mindsets, your experience historically, not just in your current positions either? Because I know you both have experience across the board here. Have you seen examples of social data adding value in a B2B context?
Absolutely. Definitely. I think what happens there is that it's about, again, measuring different metrics, different types of data sets. It might not be about engagement on a post. It might be conversions. It might be clicks. It might be about pairing it with something like UTM tracking and things like that. It becomes a bit more, I think, I don't want to say technical, but maybe a bit more or less of those well-known metrics, essentially, that well-known piece. At the end of the day, B2B social strategies, they're still, resonating somewhere and getting someone involved. Okay, you might not have someone in your inbox complaining because maybe that's where less time is needed, but it absolutely then becomes even more important to be evaluating that data alongside everything else that's going on by bringing in things like your web data, bringing in other conversions, bringing it in as part of the funnel, essentially, I think is where it becomes a really important play for B2B. And the other place I do see it really layering value for B2B is that advocacy piece, as you mentioned, because of course, it's when you start hearing from the folks on the front line and those employees and the people who are selling or doing whatever it is that they need to be doing in the B2B space. I think that adds value, and it's really important. I think the advocacy piece, because then you're getting to tap into everyone's network. You get to be leveraging that trusted advisor piece within your employees as well, and that opens up a whole other level of social data as well, and a different ROI for sure.
Yeah, if I kind of throw that into essentially what you're saying is that you're utilizing the social data to try and understand social media's value in driving the overall marketing agenda, the digital marketing agenda, towards either thought leadership generation, traffic advancement to websites, sort of how that builds into the sales or lead generation pipelines that B2B sort of classically follows, which is that sort of lead generation into the general sales pipeline of like a Salesforce type channel, etc. Yeah.
Definitely not a volume conversation, right? Because let's just look at the mathematics of it. At a B2C level, Sattel has 6 million customers who utilize the retail forecourts. At a B2C level, at a B2B level, we have 10,000 customers. So again, if you're looking at social data from a volume perspective, you're not going to find the right answers, and you're not going to be able to justify it, which is why that's the wrong metric. What you should be using social data to do, and what we do use social data to do, is to look at nuance within B2B. And sometimes as organizations, you might be a little bit siloed, right? So say, for example, internally there's a way you would describe a product or a naming convention, and that naming convention might not exist within your market sphere. They might not understand the product or the naming convention or the tool or even the value you order at that level. So then there's that disconnect where social data can then inform how you position things, how you package things, and how you promote things. The other aspect as well, that Susie spoke about, is advocacy. And that's a really important driver for myself and my team, is to ensure that my colleagues are really empowered. So one thing I'm very proud of is Sattel actually has the largest corporate page in Africa. There's no other company in Africa that has a big of a corporate LinkedIn page as Sattel. So we're just under 800,000 followers now. And I spent a lot of time doing workshops with various colleagues in different regions to say, come, let's use your LinkedIn profiles, as marketing platforms. Let me empower you. Let me help you to manage your own relationships, to sort of amplify what you're doing in your area. Because at a B2B level, you're connecting with people, just like at a B2C level. So we do use a lot of social data for that as well. We ensure that when we run campaigns, that we're very strict on the type of hashtags we use, because we want to have that consistency while inviting diversity and plurality. So it's such a beautiful space to play in. So there's a lot of value for social data from a B2B perspective as well. I really think sometimes it's underutilized, because when we think social data, we think you need volume in order to justify it. But I find that's not the case.
Yeah, and you're touching on something which I wanted to jump into, which was around process in the social data aspect. And so the tools are fantastic that are available. And if you were to take a brush and sort of look at all the tools, there's pros and cons to almost every tool that you use. And so you kind of you need to look at the tools in terms of what's right for your business, in terms of how you put them into play. But one of the things that's apparent in almost every single one of them is that there's process that needs to be adopted within your organization. So whether this is being implemented by an agency or whether it's being implemented by an organization or it's a combination of both, process has to be adopted. And if you don't adopt the process correctly, then the way in which that social data is unearthed is completely impacted. So your comment now around how you're utilizing, how you're quite strict around which hashtags are being used. You're tracking those hashtags to understand the effectiveness of the campaigns that you're running inside those LinkedIn channels, right? And so if they don't use those hashtags, you're not getting that information. You're not understanding the value of all of that information. That social listening that you're doing is ineffective if the people aren't actually inputting that information. If the campaigns aren't running off those hashtags, then you're not tracking it accordingly. And so if the implementation portion and the process in between that and the education across the board, which is something Susie mentioned right at the beginning around how you build this implementation across the board. If all of those things aren't actually in place, then your social data kind of collapses in a sense. And if your data refinement on the back end, actually tidying everything up on the back, isn't actually in place, then it all collapses because the numbers are all incorrect. And so, I mean, we've just recently done a process of rebranding, and so with some of our clients, and so like that whole process has reshifted everything. And so the refinement process of that data changes the way in which the brand is perceived. And so if you get that wrong, then the data that you're presenting is incorrect. And so there's this internal process that actually has to really be thought through in order to get this social listening stuff right. And it's not actually as simple as, cool, here's a tool, there you go. And it's a bigger conversation of, cool, we've just implemented a tool. And I know that Sprout Social speak to this quite a bit, but I also, and what I'm hearing from you, MJ, is that your conversations internally throughout the group are of the same kind of ilk, is to say that, like, it's more than just, like the page. It's more than, here's the hashtag. It's understanding that that social media is more than just a thing that you do. It's the thing that pieces everything together. The best explanation I ever heard of was social media is not a channel. It's the mesh between the channel. It's described as the mosh pit in between everything. It's the movement of your audience around the channels. And it actually is what feeds everything together. And if you understand it as the thing between the TV and the radio and the retail store and the pump and everything in between that the customer does, if you understand it as that, then social data is everything in between that. And then all your processes have to kind of manipulate that, or at least help you manage that to some degree and create structure. And there's like this web that we almost put in these little like markers that are flexible enough to be able to manage this, but that send us these little pointers to sort of say, hey, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, and this is what we're measuring the whole time. And so it's quite a complex thing that we're trying to achieve with social data at the end of the day, if we really think about it.
It is, and you've brought up some really important points, right? So if we want employee advocacy and if we want our people to share messages, we want to empower them, then we need to look at governance. Is our governance empowering people? So the social media policies, do they empower our people? Do they incentivize our people? Do they motivate our people? And that's something I'm very passionate about. So the social media policies, that we author, things like that, take a very employee-centric view. So as much as social media policies would traditionally protect an organization and be an extension of an HR process or whatever it is, when it comes to what we're doing, we're saying, look, social media is, it has the potential to be a really great positive tool. I mean, it has the potential to be risky as well. We recognize that, but for most people, it's really positive, it's really powerful. So how do you use it responsibly, and how do we as an organization empower you and give you that confidence to use it, so that, when you are putting something out online, we're there to support you, we're there to amplify you, and we're there to incentivize. So if I come back to that hashtag, if an employee is using the correct hashtag, I'd incentivize that. I'd amplify their content, and then all of a sudden it goes from their 500, 800 followers to this huge audience. We get about 46 million views on our LinkedIn page every month, and that's valuable for them, because we're saying to our colleagues, come, you're subject matter experts. You're remarkable because you work for this company. That's all you need to be remarkable, is the fact that you work for Sasol. Let's celebrate you. Let's put you out there to shine. And I've seen the value in that. And if colleagues don't use the hashtags, then it's also a very human touch, where I'm sending them a message, or I'm spending some time saying, hey, love this post. Consider using this hashtag because we're tracking it. And I find sometimes it's just as simple reaching out to someone to say, hey, I love what you're doing. Just tweak this a little bit. It helps a lot. And then you find that going forward, there's a lot more interest, there's a lot more awareness of what the organization is trying to do, and people's role in terms of supporting that. So that's very important to me.
Oh, that's okay.
I think hearing the word empowerment, that's all that kept going through my mind as well. It's so important. It's giving your employees a voice. It's recognizing them. And I'll also say as well, kind of putting back to when you, Mike, were kind of talking about the tool element. Like, it's just even nice to hear people talking about it now. It was like a dirty little secret years back when you were using software to do any of this stuff. You were considered almost like less sophisticated if you were using a tool, and it was like, why aren't you doing things natively? Why do you need software to do this? And it's like, because you need software for nearly everything that you're doing in the business market and the business world, and having something that can help you collate that data and help you analyze it and being able to look at it all is so important. You wouldn't send someone something on a notes piece if they were looking for a PDF. You'd have to use something to build your PDF and convert it into that. I kind of always try and remind people that, like, there shouldn't be a fear when it comes to using these tools. And again, that's also an empowerment piece. It's part of your tech stack. It's part of what you're using as a company. It's something that gives you confidence. It's an education, and it does drive as well into that, even as the individual user at the end of the day. It gives them a peace and a sense of kind of comfort, I think, knowing as well that they can use those tools.
Yeah, it's so true. Go for it, MJ.
Thanks. I love what Susie said there. I think sometimes we romanticize effort, and we romanticize sort of like, I don't want to call it grunt work, but really tough, intensive work. Yeah. And we sort of, traditionally, you want to give the impression that as a brand, you're always on. As a brand, your team's available on standby 24/7. And we're shifting away from that. We really are, I mean, a lot of brands will still have that, and some brands have the resources for that. So, for example, a large telecoms group in South Africa has 50 people who do just community management. Yeah. Now, if as another brand, you don't want to allocate resources to get 50 people to manage your brand 24/7, then you cannot be online 24/7, and you have to manage those expectations with your consumers, and you have to be reasonable about what you can do. So, Susie, I definitely take your points about it. Used to be a bit of a dirty secret in the past, if you were using tools. But now, if you aren't using tools and you're sort of at that level where you needed to add that business value, then I would question, what are you holding on to? What is this sort of romanticized idea of effort and strife that is not compatible with where you need to be? So, lovely point. Really enjoyed that.
I always say to guys, don't try and ask yourself, like, what's expected of us in terms of our delivery. You've got to ask yourself, what do you have resource for, and why are you on social media? What are you hoping to achieve by it? And so we want to be there for our customers. Okay, great. Well, we know you're normally there for your customers. We're normally there for our customers between 8 and 5. Okay, well, then be there for your customers between 8 and 5. Is there value, or is there a need for you to be there 24/7? Well, no, not really. There's nothing where we can really do for them at night except say, we'll get back to you tomorrow. Well, then what's the point, really? I can create a bot that will tell them exactly that. to do that for them, so why pay someone overtime or get someone who is awake at that time to do that work for you? Why do that just to create that experience? You're just wasting resource, really, and that's not smart in anyone's book. And so I always challenge my clients to kind of go, well, what's the value set at the end of the day? What's the value that we're providing the client? Because if we're not providing the customer with value, then there is no reason at the end of the day. And if you, as a business, can't provide the value that you're hoping to achieve, then rather don't. There's a lovely concept called brand schizophrenia, and in social media we do it all the time. We try and create this perception that we're something we're not, and then people actually experience us and realize that we're not that, and then they hate us for it. But if we actually just let people know who we are, they're actually quite happy about it. So.
I think some of it is, we have to have sober conversations about, the intent of what we're doing. Like, a lot of brands saw a lot of value for some reason in going live all the time. And they would go live often just because the platform functionality, would allow you to go live. So as a brand, you say, okay, cool. Notwithstanding that it's not a space that you're going to add value in, you're just going to go live for the sake of it.
Yeah.
Whereas for that brand, it might have been so much more valuable if they curated and packaged something that was a bit more tighter, a bit more, with better production values, and posted that, as opposed to the gimmick of just going live. So we see this happening. I'm quite lucky. I've been in the industry for 2 decades now. So you start to see the trends and what people latch on to. And often, you'd latch on to a gimmick, or you'd latch on to a platform just because it's new and shiny. And you're not going to use that platform because it makes sense for you. And that's part of the problem, right? So whether it's a social media platform like TikTok or whatever it is, just because it's huge and it's amazing and it's fun, that's not reason enough for a brand to be there. You need to figure out what's your value there. Is it going to be more work for you? Are you diluting your brand? Do you have, something you can offer on that platform? And if not, it's okay. You don't have to be everywhere,
Yeah.
I think there's there's a perfect example as well, where I think we're moving into a means of where social is now becoming so sophisticated, and all the different platforms are becoming so nuanced that we can't all do it all. And you are going to have to start going down the route of, we're going to have the Instagram expert, and we're going to have the Twitter expert, and we're going to have the TikTok expert. And you touched on TikTok is not as straightforward as people think. And also as a business, it's not as straightforward as you think. There is a lot that you actually do have to end up being mindful of and being careful of. And it's not just about getting on those trends, and I think as well from the agency perspective, that's something that's so, you always have to walk that tightrope with your clients of saying, like, I hear you, I know you'd love to be on TikTok, but you're a B2B brand. Can we just figure this out about like what you think that's going to do? Or who do you think is going to create all that content? Who's going to measure it, report on it? You're going to need one person to do just that for that platform alone. And I think you're right. It's about taking that step back, looking at it over time, using your expertise and being able to actually have the confidence to say, I actually really don't think this is where we should go right now, or let's sit back and wait 6 months, 12 months, because there's certain platforms that we've watched rise and we've watched them fall, and you don't want to have to be kind of saying to someone, I told you so, in a year or two's time after it's failed for them.
Yeah, and I think that, looping that whole conversation back into the data conversation for me is that, if you have a conversation around platform, and let's just take a look at like the last couple of years in social media, there've been a couple of big platform moves. Facebook was huge and now is under a lot of controversy, and some people have ditched it completely and some have carried on regardless, and most of the world is kind of just accepting what is and carrying through. If you're in youth marketing, everyone's chasing TikTok as the next unicorn, and whether that's the right thing to do or not is really dependent on what results you're getting. Twitter seems to be trying to revive itself in many ways, and in some cases it's not doing well, in some cases it is doing well. And Snapchat disappeared almost overnight as a marketing tool, and yet at some point was the bee's knees. It was what TikTok is today, and everyone was trying to figure out how to get there, and spending a lot of money building brands in those spaces. And then there was this quiet beast in the background growing in the background of all of this called LinkedIn, which has now become a absolutely massive, massive deal for many, many businesses. And that's my opinion. Talk to someone else, they'll have a whole different opinion, and they'll disagree with me, and they'll say TikTok's the best thing on this since sliced bread, and Twitter's still alive, and this is what and they'll have a whole different viewpoint, and they might be right as well, dependent on what kind of work they're doing, and where they're sitting, and what they're trying to do, and what their experiences have been. And so, my viewpoint on a lot of this stuff is that these are platform specific, and if we're talking about a social media strategy, we can't be platform specific. We need to be social media specific. We're about engaging our audience, our community, our customers, and our employees and our stakeholders through social media that allows us to connect in a way with them that we've never been able to do before prior 10 years ago. And it's a different means of connecting. It's a different way of connecting. And I won't get into that because we've been talking about it for 15 years now. But the thing is that this is the way in which we market now. But the day we make it platform specific, we invest too much in the platform and our understanding of the platform and not enough in our understanding of the customer. And social data is the opportunity to understand the customer, the nuances that MJ is talking about, the opportunities between the markets, the channels that we're talking about in the B2B. These are the opportunities that exist for us to understand. And so when you bring in TikTok and you say, well, where does this fit into the picture? And when I asked TikTok themselves, where did you fit into the picture? Their answer to me was, we fit into the awareness picture. And so I was like, great, now I know where you fit in, who your target audience is. So now we can fit you into our marketing picture, and we can understand how you sit with our client expectations as a platform. But you're not sitting here as the be all and end all of the centerpiece of our social media strategy, because you can't. Because our social media strategy isn't a platform strategy. It's a strategy to engage our customers better, to engage our employees better. And so data allows us to be able to do that. And that's the social data conversation. And that's what makes social data so important, is because if we understand that, then we have a strategy that can be platform agnostic. And so when the world does give up the ghost against Facebook as a platform, and Facebook announces the new Meta platform that everyone gets excited about and jumps on for the next time, the next 10 years, with their headsets and their Google Glass or whatever it is they end up wearing, that doesn't shatter our business strategy, because our business strategy wasn't reliant on a platform. It was reliant on an understanding of our customer and the data behind that. And so we can continue embarking in this new world that we're in. And so that, for me, is what all of this brings to the table, is that opportunity. Let me jump into something else quickly, because I wanted to bounce one or two questions off you guys. So here's one for me, because this is something that vacillates the back of my mind, okay? The privacy conversation around data. Okay. As social networks become more private, and I believe we haven't seen the end of this, they're going to become more private. We've only seen the beginning of the governance around privacy and information. I mean, TikTok information is pretty much unavailable outside of TikTok, right? LinkedIn is unavailable, etc. So these are networks that we can't gain access to. So when we talk about social listening from a point of view of being able to listen to public data, there's less and less and less and less of it available. Does it still have value? Is it still going to have value? Do we see future value in being able to listen to this public data? What are your thoughts?
I think it's definitely important to bring up the privacy conversation, for sure. I think we are, it's a realistic situation where we're at the mercy of what, networks also decide. Again, I think that's important when certain tools, we're official partners with all of our networks for a reason. We don't do anything we shouldn't be doing. We're never untoward. We don't tap into something that's not available publicly on various APIs. But I still think there's value there. There's people who want their voices heard, and there's people out there who are creating content or speaking about certain things or being able to do that. And I think it's also what you're doing with the data is incredibly important. And I think that's also an ethical question that companies, businesses, brands always have to ask themselves. Why are you listening? And if it is, it's also an onus on the brand itself to make sure that they're not misbehaving, I think, as well. There's always the best of intent there, but it's still an important measurement. And again, with that kind of combination piece, it's great when you can probably search for your Facebook name and have a look at where it's being mentioned, but how do you measure that up alongside where it's maybe being spoken about? I mean, on other platforms, we think about things like Reddit, for example, being such a free speech place, and I think there's some really valuable conversations that go on there. And you'll find maybe as well, and I think it's sometimes in the B2B space, Reddit's actually quite important because people are speaking there about certain industries. I've noticed myself working with certain crypto clients that Reddit is of huge importance when it comes to social listening, because it's where people are speaking an awful lot about it alongside Twitter. I think, yes, there is going to be that privacy element. And of course, everyone is entitled to that level of privacy, but there are public platforms and public forums where we are interacting and engaging with our favorite brands, with certain industries, with certain types of products and services, or we're going out somewhere, we're doing things, and those kind of conversations and capturing those, I still think are going to have value. But I do agree that it's probably going to pivot and evolve, or maybe we're looking at different networks in 10 years' time that we're tapping into as those like focus group elements, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, so privacy is paramount, and so you just dropped a lot of great info there. I think when we look at brands as well, it's also an education thing internally. So social listening and social data used to be something very different about 10 years ago, right? It used to be very much about let's scour the internet, let's see what people are saying. But with that, it's also a little disingenuous if you do not educate the person you're reporting to, or you're educating to say, this is not everything. This is what we have access to. This is what's publicly available, So there will be blind spots, and it's important that we recognize these blind spots, we acknowledge them. And we say that sometimes certain platforms get a larger share of voice when it comes to social data, simply because those platforms enable that to happen.
Yeah.
So Twitter, Twitter has two privacy settings, right? You either have a public account or a private account. And if the majority of people have a public account, it's very easy to search through that for certain keywords. And then that'll skew the percentage or the share of voice for that platform. And it'll make you think that maybe Twitter is where all the conversation is happening. And we know that that's not necessarily the case. I mean, for a lot of brands, that conversation might be happening on WhatsApp. And you have no line of sight on that, So it's also important to have a very sober look at your data input, what's coming in, where all those what those sources are, what you don't have access to, but also as from a brand's perspective, which platforms you're not invited to. Again, as a brand, should you be everywhere? Should you be disruptive? And should you not give the consumer that choice? If they're going to talk to you on a public platform like Twitter, where it's searchable. And again, it's really important for me that if there's something that's a perception that you can then engage and add value to and respond without being disruptive, you do that. But if you can't, then how much value do you put on that? So I think it is something that's definitely evolving. It's something that we need to make sure as responsible marketers that we tell our principals about, to say, this is not a snapshot of all conversation. This is a snapshot of some of the conversation that's publicly searchable. There's a lot of blind spots, and that's okay. What we need to do is we need to make sure that we're listening to everything we can find publicly, but we also understand that there's conversations that are not happening publicly that we also need to plug into somehow. And it might not necessarily be a disruptive way, but it's for us to have that platform where someone sends me a WhatsApp screenshot. Hey, can you verify this? So we are seeing the blurring of the lines, but I think at the same time, it's really important that as the industry matures, we know exactly what it does, and we know what social data doesn't do. So yeah, that's it's an important conversation.
I'm going to say I completely agree with you, MJ. I think that's so important, and it's a great point where you have to have that, handle that objection and have that like conversation and education, and say, I can't do that. I can't go and find those private WhatsApp conversations, and almost reminding people of the privacy and ethical elements of that. And it's okay. We can't. Here's what we can do. And can you imagine if this is what we're finding publicly, what maybe we could be possibly alluding to privately, but we're getting sentences and snapshots of some of that conversation. But that means we heads up, if this is happening publicly, it's definitely happening privately. So we can kind of more than likely safely assume that for sure.
I think for me, it's about trends, insights, and understanding that these are indications of what's taking place. Market research is a genuine market research study that marketers will run on as given research on a marketplace of millions of people can be done on a 1,000-person database. Like that's a genuine market research database that people will work with. And that's what you can work with inside Twitter and inside whatever marketplace you're looking at. And you're dealing with much bigger numbers than that. But we're talking about indications. We're talking about trends. We're talking about an opportunity to use a focus group. I mean, we use it now when we market this event. We talk about social media as a focus group. But I think that's what it is. It's a focus group. It's a group of people that are sharing a view of your brand or a view of what's taking place in the world today. And we can use that to make an educated understanding of what's taking place. But it's not the view. Whereas when we first started doing this, we used to be able to literally click on the tweet that the guy said and visit their profile and know that that person said this thing, which was scary as hang and should have been illegal. And I'm glad it is now, But I like what Susie was saying is that the industry is evolving, and it is going to evolve, and there are going to be new platforms, and there are going to be new regulations, and there are going to be new ways to access data. And what I've already seen in trying to build some of these tools myself in the past is that we're going to gain access to this information, not necessarily in bite-sized pieces, but in aggregated pieces. And so as the industry evolves in the social listening space, the way in which we can access this information is going to change. And so we're still going to have access to this information. It's going to come at us in various different ways. And so I'm quite excited about what it brings. And I think the privacy conversation is an important one because the unlimited access that we've had is unfair and it's not correct. But I think that that as this space evolves, there's what I'm hearing from both of you is there's a technical platform need to kind of adapt and to adapt to kind of how the regulation is going to force the way in which we manage that structure. But then there's an education means to understand those that are listening to that data, to understand that this isn't everything, and that some of this information can be seen as a parable of what's been taking place. Some of it can be seen as a concrete understanding of this is actually what this customer said about your teller, and sometimes it's concrete, sometimes it's an indication, sometimes it's a story, sometimes it's not always the same thing. And it's not always, it can't be read as scripture every single time. And so we've got to help people understand how to be able to interpret this data in each case. And so I think it's an interesting conversation that I've been watching quite closely myself. And I think it's going to change the dynamic quite a bit over the next couple of years, I think. I wanted to close with one more question to you guys. And Susie, I'm not too sure how if you've got some stuff to weigh in here as well. But MJ, I know that you've been quite involved, and mainly because I can see all the things that you're involved in as you kind of post away on your various social profiles. But I know that you, like me, are involved in training people in social media and in understanding social data and all these different things. In the social data conversation, what are the hang-ups or the roadblocks that you are finding people having? What are the things that you're feeling you have to find ways to overcome?
No, that's a great question. Sort of, I alluded to it a little earlier, but I'm going to just recap, right? Is that when you look at any of this data, you have to understand all the various things that brings these inputs together, right? So access is a large part of it. So when you look at social data and then you make it the be-all, end-all, you're just focusing on a subset. And we don't necessarily always understand what's motivating people to talk about something, Sometimes people will be talking about something that's newsworthy, or they'd use your organization or company as a proxy just because they themselves want to be relevant online. And that's something to consider. Other times, the organization might be brought into conversation and it might be completely incorrect or not factual or whatever, but it's simply just because it's an engagement metric or it's just something that people get to talk about. And they don't necessarily talk about your brand all the time, but something happened that triggered a thought. So often when I talk to colleagues about the value of social media and the value of social data, I always tell them, consider a few things. Number one, consider that it is, it's a slice of reality, that it represents a few things, that we have to have a few assumptions in mind. We have to make sure that we know that access to social media to talk about these things, it is a factor of whether you can actually go online and do it, whether you have the time to do it, whether those conversations are things that are publicly searchable as well. So we see a lot of conversations happening in Facebook groups that the tools won't track. And sometimes these are important conversations. So I always tell colleagues as well, when you're looking at these reports, when you're looking at this data, number one, it's not the be all end all. Number two, social media in and of itself, it is not the only pure reflection of the brand. Sometimes people might be talking about a brand and they aren't even customers of the brand, but there's a status attached to that brand that they like. And what's the value of that, if it doesn't translate into something? So I always tell my colleagues, be measured when you look at social media data, and know that at the end of the day, a great content strategy will never fix a poor product. And that's where you'll see it. You'll also see disconnects happen where a brand appears to be one thing on social media and really responsive and human friendly and compassionate, but a complete disconnect, at a point of execution, at the till or whatever it is. And how do you rather make sure that you're more consistent as a brand, you're more compassionate as a brand across the board, than really just fixate on social data in a silo and not consider everything else around the brand? Often my colleagues will come to me and say, we're going to run this campaign, we want to go viral. And I'm like, that in itself is not a great metric, because brands can go viral all the time. If there was an incident at a convenience store, let's say a robbery or whatever, that brand is going to go viral. And it's not the sort of virality you want. So it's also about educating people to say, going viral in and of itself isn't something to celebrate. What are you trying to achieve? What is it? Some level of awareness that goes back to your product? And let's forget about the buzzwords. Let's forget about what we think we want to be. Let's forget about trying to be what we aren't, and just focus on trying to be a better version of ourselves today than we were yesterday.
Yeah, I like it. Susie, have you had similar kind of things happen? I know that you're involved a lot on the solution side. Like, what are the hang-ups? What are people getting caught on in the social data conversation?
I think sometimes it's asking that question of like, what should we be measuring? And I'm almost like, there's no right answer to that. It's really different for every brand, every business, every team. Everyone has a different level of importance and something they should be measuring. And that's something you need to ask yourself and ask your wider business. And it feeds back into, what MJ was mentioning about having that business knowledge and having that awareness of what's going on where you're working, that you can tie in with the social data. So brand awareness, is that audience growth or is that something else? How are you going to measure that? And I think it's just, again, about educating yourself on both your business and the social metrics and the social data, and saying to yourself, what would be an interesting focus? And then that can feed into so many other pieces of the social team, where they're dedicating time, where they're dedicating resources, where they're dedicating education. So the other thing as well is, don't be stagnant. I think it's important to realize that you might set yourself some KPIs and goals in January. And again, we don't know the scape and the landscape. It changes and moves so quickly that might not actually be relevant by the time it comes to the summer. And something could be completely different and more valuable for you to be tracking and tracing then. So I think having that fluidity with it and being willing to pivot and change. You don't just set your KPIs in December and do not shift from them for any reason until December the next year. There might be something that does happen. And it can be even something, as I've seen it happen, where someone else comes into the company and they have a completely different view and and then they're kind of butting heads with people because they're saying to them, no, actually, I think that we should change this. And it's being open and accepting the change and having those conversations for sure. Social data is that's going to help with that. It's always about bringing it back to that as well. It's for sure. That's one thing I've found when someone asks me, like, what should I be measuring? And I'm like, I cannot answer that for you, because I don't work for you and I don't work for your company, and we can work together on figuring it out for sure. But there is no way I'm going to just send you measure this.
Yeah.
It's really not that straightforward, but that's also the excitable element, I think, of it, because you get to make it and you get to see it and decide, okay, well, I know that that's so important for our business and our brand. I'm going to decide and I'm going to make sure that we measure this on social to make sure that it's all tying in as well with the business, the need there.
I think that's what is so important, and I think that's the key thing right across this whole conversation that we've been saying is that it all comes down to that business strategy, and social data is really just insight into whatever you really want insight into, but it only means something if it's a lens, if you have a lens in which to view it through, and that lens is your KPI, it's your business reality, it's the industry that you're in, it's whatever it is that you're wanting to look at it through. And if you don't have a lens, then it's just data, it's ones and zeros, and it's not going to mean much to you. So that business conversation that we had right at the beginning, that whole conversation around how that metric means something to you, et cetera, and like now we're kind of coming full circle back to that same conversation of just saying, what is it that you want to achieve? What are the metrics that can help you see if you're tracking well against those? And let's measure those out and see that. And sometimes what I've said to clients is that sometimes when you do that, it's not a social data metric that you need to be tracking. It's a business metric that you need to be tracking. And social media might help you get there, and that's what you want, but it's a business metric that we need to be tracking against. The amount of conversations that I've had with people where they come to me and say, "Oh, I need a marketing campaign that must go viral," and then you talk to them and you talk to them for 10, 15 minutes, and you realize, well, actually, what they need are 7 more leads a month. That's actually what they need, and that's what they're going to get measured on. They don't need a viral campaign. They need 7 more leads a month, and getting 7 more leads a month is a very different conversation than making a campaign go live, go viral. MJ.
Oh, wonderful points. I think right now, because you can measure everything, right? There's a fixation on measuring, but we need to have these sober conversations and say, just because you can measure something doesn't mean it's valuable. No. And just because you put it in place a KPI or a metric at the beginning of the year doesn't mean that you have to hold that sacred if it's not aligning to your business. And we see this so often. So my team and I were involved in quite a big website overhaul. And in the middle of that, the company had a complete restructure in terms of becoming more decentralized and, being less of an integrated sort of balance sheet. And then we had to sit back and say, okay, cool. What is our role now as group communication? What is the role of this website? How does it change? And if we were so fixated on what we set out to do, we wouldn't budge and we wouldn't offer any value. So I think there's a few things happening that we need to be really sober about. Number one, we need to move away from this fixation on measuring everything. We need to measure what matters. But number two, we also need to ensure that as we measure and as we analyze things, we don't get so critical and so insular and so zoned in and focused and granular that we miss the bigger picture. So I've had campaigns where colleagues have come up to me and said, okay, what's the cost per click on this campaign versus that? And I'm like, it doesn't matter because the objectives were completely different. The markets were very different. One was a very mature audience, one wasn't. One needed more touch points and more nurturing, one didn't. So how do you measure it as something as simple as saying this was 13 cents versus 17 cents? And sometimes we dilute and we reduce everything to certain little digits and certain numbers, and we lose all the essence, we lose all the education and all the intuition and knowledge that goes into it. Because by the time it goes up the ladder, we've reduced it to something so simple, and we've taught our principals that this is how you measure value. So it's really important that we continue to have those conversations, that people in digital and people in marketing are empowered, are enabled to be able to say, this is how we measure, this is what we're measuring, and to have that flexibility to say what we measured yesterday might not necessarily be relevant today, and let's not die on the measurement. Let's rather see what the business needs and make sure that we're constantly offering business value, not communication value.
Yeah, so cool. That's fantastic, guys. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation. And it's really great to kind of just see how it maneuvered its way through. It was really great to chat about social data and its value in this marketing / business context. And I think it's really, really key. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn to our audience now, and I'm going to ask you guys if you can tag us, Digital Lab SA, on any of the platforms. You drop us notes on our platforms, on the live feed, wherever you are. Kind of just give us a shout, comment, tag us, and tell us what kind of key moments or key lessons that you're learning through this live feed that you've learned that have kind of stood out to you. Just let us know what they are. We'd love to hear from you. It'd be a really cool way. We will be doing some tracking on the social data side to make sure that we catch what you're saying. So just tag us in that and we will track it down. Social data in African context. And I think we've gone a little bit further than that as well. And so we're really hoping that this conversation has really meant a lot to you guys, and that we've been able to explore something that very often has been a little bit detached in the conversation around social media. So Susie, thank you so much for your time. MJ, thanks for yours. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to both of you. And hopefully we'll be doing a lot more of these, and we'll see you at some of the new ones that we do in the future. Thanks so very, very much, guys. An absolute pleasure.
Thank you.